T1s, one of the few everlasting hot topics in Evony. But with the state of the game right now, are T1s still any good? Hi, and welcome to redevony. I am Akayasha. You can call me Aka. So, for those of us that don't know, I had a long sit down conversation with my good friend, Mr. Yours. And we talked about T1s, the current state of T1s, and how players can make their T1 and trap game better. And it was a really good conversation. Also, as a bit of a side note, both of us are sponsored by Paxify, which is great for what it is. And if you need to save money on your packs or in-game purchases, you should definitely check out Paxify. Okay? That's just a quick plug for you guys right there. Now, for those of you that do know, this video is the edited full version of the conversation that I had with Mr. Yours, because I had already put up a shorter version earlier on. Now, of course, the full conversation was about 2 hours long, so I did cut out almost like an hour of the whole thing, but yeah, it's still what it is, so here's the full video. Now, for a lot of you, I don't expect that you might watch this in one full go. If you do, great. But if you don't, for your convenience, I've included timestamps in the video, so it makes it easier for you to navigate and get to where you were before. Or if you want to come back and watch certain portions of the video again, that's possible. So there you go, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope it helps give you some insights on how you can improve your T1 game. Right, let's hop into it now. Hi, guys. So I am here with, one of my favoriteest people in the whole of Evony, Mr. Yours himself. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well, Aka. I gotta say, man, thank you for welcoming me onto this channel. I hope you're doing good yourself.
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm doing great. And you're always welcome here, bro. Like, I don't need to tell you that. As long as you don't just like kick the door down or something, it's cool.
You never know what might happen, though, man. You gotta be careful.
Yeah, especially when you've had like one or two of them white claws,
Yes. Someday we'll have one together. All right.
All right. Yeah, looking forward to it, man. All right. So, the topic that we have today is talking about traps. All right. Traps and their effectiveness in Evony as it is right now. And I'm glad to have you here to discuss this because you are one of the foremost trap practitioners of Evony. I remember even before I got to know you, I remember seeing your shorts with the traps and thinking to myself, like, what the hell is this guy doing?
Yeah, we had some
So
pretty crazy moments.
yes. So that's that. So we're gonna talk about we'll talk about some key points, some things that might be of interest to people that are playing traps or that are graduating from traps to more fully fleshed out keeps and things like that, and see if we can give them any advice to deal with the current realities that we have now. All right, just to kick things off, let's kind of lay the baseline of what exactly a trap is, because I think some people have are a bit confused about that. They see a keep with T1s and it's automatically a trap. Is that correct?
Not every keep now with a bunch of T1s is considered a trap anymore, I don't think, nowadays.
Okay.
Um, you know, I know I'm sure we'll talk about it, but I think a lot of players, even at the larger scale, they run the lower tier troops just to have those thick layers.
I fully agree. I mean, let's have a look at your keep. You have you have quite a bit of power right now. What's your current power right now?
So this is my main keep. Currently I'm
Oh,
just shy of 50 billion.
yeah.
However, this 50 billion, a lot of it is mainly just because of the trap keep standards, I should say.
Okay.
I focus very heavily on my T1 mounts, which are maxed out. I
Mhm.
guess I'm a little bit bigger than a trap because my T2s, 3s, and 4s are maxed out as well.
Okay.
but
All
I
right.
like having that trap defense.
Okay, that's very good. I think we will, we'll definitely want to talk a bit about that later on. Okay, so this is my keep, and I'm, just a little bit above 10 billion. And, I wouldn't consider myself a trap, even though I've got quite a bit of T1s. Well, quite a bit in, maybe not in like the regular sense, but I've got a few T1s. I've got, some lower tiers as well. Um, but at 10 billion, I wouldn't really consider myself a trap, per se. I've got, higher tier troops and things like that. Um, so I don't know. Like for me, I think, being a trap is when the way I define it is when you give the perception of low power, but you are very heavy on troops. So that would mean that you'd be predominantly lower tier troops, T1s, maybe some T2s, and just few upper layers. Would you agree with that?
I would, yes,
Okay.
100%, and going by the trap standards, I mean, I think you nailed it in the head. You see this little keep, 1.2, maybe 1.6 build power. You think it's an easy clear until you splat on that T1 wall.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I think, it's important for us to make that distinction because, maybe there's some people here, they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm a trap, and they're like, 15 bill, you know?
Yeah, yeah, you're not a trap anymore at that point.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I think like, when you have the perception of low power and you're heavy on the lower tier troops, for me personally, I would even go as far as to say like if you're under 5 bill, um, yeah, I think you probably qualify as a trap at that point.
I agree. I agree.
Mm. What the situation is now. With the current climate and with how things are in the game, why is it? Because I guess the general perception is that it's difficult to be a trap now in Evony. What do you think about that?
I would say it is difficult to be a trap, yes, but it also depends on your environment as well. Depending
How do you
on
mean?
so looking at what team you're with,
Mhm.
yeah, I think that's a big justification to who you're going to be facing when it comes to SVS and challenge and all the battlefields, so to speak of. Because if you're not part of a larger team, I think the older standards of a trap keep still kind of apply to some scenarios. But if
Right?
you're on part of a more competitive team, I think the standards of being a quote unquote trap have kind of adjusted a little bit, when you're facing these bigger keeps, the 45s and the 49s and all those big monsters out there.
All right. Okay. I think that's a very nice way that you put it because if let's say for example, if you're like a trap keep like 1-2 billion and the competition that you're facing are mostly like K40s to like let's say 44. Basically, what you're saying is that the standard that we've had up till now for trap keeps is still very valid, right?
Yes, I believe so, but it's also very situational too. It depends on your surroundings.
Okay, okay. And like you said, if you're in a situation, server, alliance, where you are facing, like the bigger players, 45s and aboves, 47s, 48s, if you have the misfortune of facing a K50 or something like that, then those old standards will not really apply. Is that what you're saying?
That's 100% what I'm saying.
Okay, I think I pretty much agree with that. And I think that's really the reality that a lot of players are facing. You know, Players that could confidently stay without bubble in front of like the biggest player on the server dare not do that anymore because, they'll be smoked quicker than you can say salmon. All right. But yeah, but yeah, I think the expansion, the K50 expansion has really changed things, for a lot of players. So, okay, let me just summarize it like this. Do you think it's still effective to be a trap right now? Yes or no?
That's a hard question to answer, because I look at all the details of the situation, but I mean, ultimately, I think it is viable. Yes.
Okay. All right. All right. So if we're okay, let's go with that premise, right? Let's say it's still viable now. All right. So let's talk a bit about, how people have been building traps up until now. Let's talk about how they've been building it up until now and why it's no longer working.
Okay. You got the T1s, like so. I mean, if you rewind it back to like before K45, right?
Mhm, mhm,
Like, and all of a sudden you scout a keep, and you're like, oh, he's got 150 million T1s, and it's like, I wonder if he's got flat refines. And
mhm,
your K40 at the time, that's sending a march. He'll send the ground or the cav or the range, and he's like, well, yep, that's a trap keep, guys. Don't hit him. You will lose. We have to rally
mhm.
that guy. Um, if you were to take that keep now and you put him in front of the K45s and up, I think it would lose. End of the day, it
Yeah.
would lose, right?
Mhm,
Because back then, the goal was to hit 100 million T1s. Not, I mean,
mhm,
it was a lot of resources, but it wasn't too difficult, right?
mhm.
And that used to work, and now I just don't think that type of gameplay is viable for the majority of gameplay nowadays, for your average SVS or Battlefield. Even at the smaller alliance powers, I still think you need to kind of upgrade your T1s above that 100 mil, 200 mil, 300 mil standards, and kind of take a look at your T2s, take a look at your T3s, and try and mitigate that flow of damage coming in.
All right. So the previous model of getting 100, 150 million T1s, do your flat refines and your golden, that doesn't work anymore, right?
Unfortunately, I don't think so.
Yeah, we're basically saying that you need more than that. If you have like 150 million T1s and below, yeah, it's not going to work. So okay, so that's fine. But I want everyone to understand that what has changed that has made that not viable anymore.
I like this. I like this topic. So the biggest thing that has changed, in my opinion, which I think you can kind of summarize very quickly, is obviously the keep levels,
Hmm.
and what came along with that, is the march size for one, and then the buffs
Yeah,
behind the march size,
yeah,
and then also it's much easier for that 13, 14 mil march size to go through those flat refines compared to
hmm,
before. It was T14s, maybe T15s at the time. And now you're looking at T16s, T17s that are hitting much harder. And they're going through your layers so fast that by the time they get to that wall, it's destroying the wall. There's no defense behind that wall anymore to these debuffs that they're giving out now, and the buffs are given out now, and then just troop composition for these large marches. It's very hard to try and mitigate that damage.
hmm.
Which is a standard quote unquote T1 trap.
Yeah, yeah. I understand exactly what you're saying, and I fully agree. The rate at which attacking, I want to use strength, not power, because I want to combine everything into buffs, march size, and all the other stuff, even debuffs as well from like research and things like that. The attacking strength has grown at a much faster pace than the usual T1 build can handle.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
I think that's, yeah, and I think that's there's been an explosion of buffs. I think the time when T1s were considered effective, what were the maximum buffs that people were having? 3, 4K, something like that.
Yes. I
Yeah.
remember you brought up YouTube Shorts earlier, and
Yeah.
remember one of my newer trap keeps on server 529. we faced a guy who had it was 2.7K ranged buffs, and
Mhm.
he soloed me, and it hurt extremely bad. And this was only going back maybe about 2 years or so, and it's advanced so much since then,
Yeah.
so incredibly advanced.
Yeah, I just think it's part of the issue that has come with the expansion of the game. I don't think there's really much we can do about it. Um so yeah, so that's that. Now, I think we've already talked about this a bit, but with what that people are doing with their traps right now, do you think that that's still effective? One, from a purely defensive standpoint, okay? And then two, from a gameplay standpoint. And what do I mean? I mean, how do traps actually play the game now? Is it still the same bait the person to attack you kind of thing, or has the meta evolved to where people are doing more things, more swaps, more trying to attack and getting them to attack you, retaliate, trash talking, even like, how do you see people playing now?
Well, I can only really tell from my personal experience with the few teammates that I have on both my servers, and my newest server, which is 1708. I'm building a trap keep over there, and how I'm
Mhm,
currently playing that trap keep. It's very defensively. There's no offense to that keep, and what I mean by that is, like when I go into battlefield, I try and help the team the best I can, mainly just by doing building control. And being a trap keep that's trying to attempt to do building control, the march speed nowadays, it's so hard to try and get out of the way of these solos, and my whole goal when I go into that battlefield is okay, I want to make sure I can lock down these miscellaneous buildings that my team needs me to, and I'll do it as fast as I can, but my defense is built so that way, in case, I have a march that's going out or returning, that if a bigger gentleman or lady decides to attack me, I'll survive that, for a couple of
mhm.
attacks and still be able to positively affect the point exchange for my team. Um,
Okay.
so before, I think there was a lot of baiting, right? You port to
Mhm,
the enemy hive, you sit in your hive with the reinforcements, and even before, you would try and do some port swaps on solo attacks or small rallies. And unfortunately, with the size of rallies nowadays, I just don't think that's as viable as far as a trap keep standard goes. It's just too risky
mhm,
for yourself and for the team.
mhm. Yeah, rallies these days are crazy now.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because when I see trap keeps, it's usually they will sit there and it's like anybody that wants to come and hit them, take your best shot kind of thing.
Hmm.
But now, while that might work for some people, as we said earlier, if you're looking at the bigger players, that's not going to work. They will toast you, right?
Yes.
So yeah, so I think, like, I like what you said when you say, like, okay, when you're doing building control, like your main objective is, if you get hit, survive like the first couple of hits. And I think for a trap keep to be fully effective now, I don't know if the goal can still be to just completely tank everything. I think the goal should be survive a few hits so that you can know what to do, whether you're going to bubble, whether you're going to run, whether you're going to get reinforcements, whatever. But those first critical one, two, maybe even three hits, you want to build so that you're strong enough to survive those. And
Yes.
if you can do that, I think that that's where, in this current environment, that's how a trap keep can still be effective.
I agree 100% on that, Eka.
Hmm. Okay, all right. So that's good. I guess the main thing with this one is, obviously, there a lot of people are a bit discouraged with the fact that the traps are not as effective as they were before. And I think the important thing now is to get people to adjust to what the reality is right now, even if that means, adjusting your expectations a bit.
Yes, you have to. The game has forced us to kind of adjust our expectations.
Yeah. So, with that being said, okay, you know what the typical structure of a trap keep has been. We're talking about trap keeps changing their views, changing their perspectives. All right. How do you think they should practically adjust things in their keeps to go with this? We'll take this, section by section. So let's start with troops. Okay. If you
Mhm.
have a trap keep that is, let's say, what's a good number? Let's say somewhere between 2 to 300 million T1 calves. How do you think they should progress from there?
Well, I mean, if you're looking at, an older trap or just say a trap keep currently with about 300 million T1 calves, I think it's very important. Now, I don't want to sidetrack this at all, but it depends on your environment, right? The size of your battlefield and SVSs. But I
Uh-huh.
mean, we'll just say it more on a competitive level. Um, if you're currently, just about a couple billion power, you have around 300 million T1s. I think it'd be very important, to try and look at a larger scale of, maybe I should increase my T1s up to, and this is a scary number, but, up to about a billion, have about a
Uh-huh.
billion T1s. Um, and then you kind of pyramid from there. And what I mean by that is, scale your T2s, somewhere around maybe 200 to 500 million T2s. And the same thing with your T3s, maybe also take your T3s up to, about 100, 200 million as well. Um, and, I think it'll be effective, but there's more you can do. You need to take a look at the reports and look at, where can I improve my troops where it's not going to be negatively affecting me, and that's not going to be your upper tiers. I think you need to build. Now, this is just me speaking here. I believe you need to build, if you're a cav trap, you need to have some decent arch layers, and I also think you need to have some decent ground layers.
Mhm.
And what I mean by
Okay.
that is, just a couple million layers, maybe nothing more.
Okay. That's something that that's a very important point that I wanted to ask you about, because a lot of people know what they're supposed to do with like the T1s. Okay. For an effective trap, you're looking at least like 1 billion T1s now. So
Hmm.
if people know that, okay, I knock out 1 billion T1s, I'm good. But what a lot of people are not really clear on is what to do with the rest of the troops.
It's a tough situation to be in. It really is, and especially if you don't have the proper guidance around you. I think opinions may vary when it comes to the true players. When you do reach that bridge of, I got my billion T1s, where do I go from here? Um,
Mhm.
I think it's very important to look at, what's going to counterattack what your weakness is. Like, so if you look, I'm a cav trap, my weakness is generally going to be ranged. So, what's going to kind of counter the range is going to be your ground. And
Mhm.
to kind of still be point effective, I think it's important to build a decent size of ground layers, maybe a couple million, but don't, in my opinion, you don't exceed too much ground troops, past like maybe the tier 8, tier 9, tier 10 level,
Mhm.
because then that's when those upper tier grounds, T10 plus, are more susceptible to, getting hit with the cav as well, and that's going to negatively affect your layers. So I think it's very
Okay.
important to be kind of still small with just heavier layers.
Okay, so you've talked about ground now. All right. Let's talk about the other troop types. Okay. One important one is siege. Because
Hmm.
people are of the opinion that, if you're a calf trap, having siege in your keep will be helpful. What do you think about that?
So I can say from experience that having siege inside of your cav trap, to a point, can be beneficial. And what I mean by that is, just having standard layers, maybe
Mm-hmm.
500,000, maybe 1.5 million. But even at 1.5 million on your upper tiers, I think will hurt you. Um,
Mm-hmm.
because siege is going to die relatively quick when it comes to being hit with larger siege numbers. We'll quote unquote, a big siege solo or rally, so to speak. And then also, I think your siege is going to be susceptible to sometimes, depending on your layers, even mounted attacks as well. So you got to
Mhm.
be very careful with your siege, and you got to mitigate. And when it comes to a trap, I don't see siege being effective. Minus just having them there for the attack, the rounds, right? Your attacking
Okay.
rounds. I think
Okay.
that's all they're really good for.
Hmm. Okay. So, people just have a bit of siege to, like touch up your layers a bit. But aside from that, you don't think that there's really much of a benefit to building out, you know, significant siege to protect the keep.
I don't think so. I don't think it's necessary, even in today's standards. You know,
Hmm.
especially if you're a trap keep that's not attacking, right?
Okay.
So it's important to keep those layers low, I think.
All right. All right. That's fine. So we've talked about siege. What about range?
So for
Ah,
me,
yeah.
this is important. It's very important, Aka. You touched a sore subject for me because I think range is very important for cap traps nowadays. And the reason why I say that is because of the fact that, yes, as people see a cav trap and they're going to say, "Oh, I'm going to range it." In today's standards, you see a lot of cav solos against
Hmm.
trap keeps. I do it myself against trap keeps. Because there's a lot. I see more cav solos now versus trap keeps than I do range solos, and even cav rallies. So I think it's crucial. I really do to have thick archer layers, but once again, not too much top heavy, right? So trying to keep those layers lower, so that way they're not getting in range of the
Okay.
oncoming attack.
All right. So what do you think is too much? Okay. Let's first of all talk about the tiers. If you have a calf trap and you're building out range, up until what tier do you think is okay for you to build out?
So the opinion may vary depending on who you talk to.
Hmm.
But I can confidently say that I'm for the trap that I'm currently building, I'm not going to exceed T12 Arch.
Okay.
Because I think even T12 Arch is kind of susceptible to a siege bomb, like a big
Hmm.
siege being soloed or rallied at you.
Hmm.
I think T12 is borderline, but I think above that you should have smaller layers, maybe a couple mil, 1 or 2 mil at most. But for the trap I'm currently building, I plan on having roughly now I don't want my enemies to know this, but uh, I'm looking to have between 10 and 20 million siege layer. I mean, sorry, arch layers from T1 up to T12.
Wow.
It's excessive.
Wow.
It's
Okay.
excessive, but it's an experiment right now.
Okay. All right. All right. Fair enough. So we're saying that, okay, for range, T12 is kind of like the cutoff. It's kind of like where beyond that you should only have like a minimal amount, is what we're saying, right?
In my opinion, yes.
Okay. All right. That's cool. So I think for the troops, we've touched on pretty much everything. We've touched on the cav, we've touched on the ground layers, we've touched on range, and we touched on siege. One thing I would like to ask though, because this is something that I'm seeing more these days. Okay, you have somebody that is a calf trap. They are set up as a calf trap in the complete sense of the word, but then they're building out ground. What do you think about that? And when I say building out ground, I mean T1 ground.
Um, I think that can hurt them more than it can help them, right? So if they're quote unquote a pure cav trap, so they're focusing their debuffs on range, they're focusing their
Mhm.
wall general on mounted flat refines, their dragon
Mhm.
on mounted flat refines. Um, at that point, I wouldn't recommend having too many T1 grounds.
Okay.
Maybe 50 million, 100 million at most, but I still think that kind of leaves you on the borderline of costing points instead of winning points, right?
Okay, but let me ask, because I'm looking at your keep right now. You've got a bit, quite a bit of ground in there.
Yes, I
How,
do.
I mean, obviously your keep is way beyond what we will consider in the trap range, but just talk us a bit about how that ground that you have in there, how that works for you.
So for my current keep,
Mhm,
I would like to mention, my current keep is actually set up to be a trap keep, quote unquote.
mhm,
My dragon is all flat mounted. My wall general is
mhm,
all flat mounted. Um, I primarily focus range debuff with a mixture of siege and mounted. Um,
mhm,
so with that being said, I do have very big layers for mounted,
mhm.
and then I also have kind of thicker layers for my T1 ground, which is 730 mil. My
Mhm.
overall goal is around 800.
Okay.
And then t- uh, 100, 200 for the T2s. And the reason
Mhm,
why, so I did experimenting over the years of being attacked with the amount of calves I have, and the teams that we face at my level is generally for a Archer rally versus me, I typically see, around 3 to 5% of the entire rally that my T1 ground kills for me, right? Kind of
mhm,
counter attacks. So I look at that as, you know, it's more of a point gain for me. Now it can hurt me. Don't get me wrong. This can hurt me if they send the right rallies, and I'm not ready for it. But
mhm,
at around 700 mil T1 ground right now, it's killing. I'd say on average around 3 to 5% of every single rally that's sent at me. Now that
mhm.
3 to 5% that it kills, on average, it takes probably about 4, 5, or 6 range rallies to kill me, to kill
Okay.
my calf wall.
Okay. All right. All right. That's fine. That's fine. Now, let's say somebody, obviously seeing your keep, and they love Mr. Yours, obviously. And yeah, and they're like, okay, well, I want to kind of copy your model. Okay. You've clearly got the carve focus on your T1 and your T2 and so on. But then you've also got the ground. So it's like,
hmm
if they're looking at it and they're thinking, okay, well, I'll still build my T1s, but then why don't I also build some ground, What would you say to that kind of person?
I would say be cautious. Be
Mhm.
cautious. I think it truly depends on what size you are, because I didn't
Mhm.
build any ground until I was around maybe 30 billion power. So, I
Okay.
think that speaks volume, right?
Mhm.
So if you're trying to be more of a trap standard, I don't think you should be looking at building ground anytime soon in the near future of your trap adventures. Mine's only situational to what I'm facing in my situation on this keep, right?
Yeah. Okay. All right. That's fine. That's fine. For me, my keep is quite different. So, I don't know if you've seen my video. Maybe some people might have on defense. Anyone watching, if you haven't seen those videos, you should really check them out. But
I
what I
agree. Check them out.
Thanks, man. Thanks for the plug, man. So what I have done is I've kind of gone mix with my keep. Okay, so I've gone with a mix of ground and calf. Of course, that has the pros, that has the cons. We'll save that discussion for later. But my case, I have. Let me just go to it. By the way, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So I've structured my layers here. Okay. And I tried to keep it like 3, 2, 1. Okay. So roughly like 300 for T1, roughly like 200 for T2, and roughly like 100 for T3. Okay.
hmm
That's the current structure I'm using now. So it's easy for me to take note of what I'm doing and things like that. And of course, this is still like a work in progress, no question. But I'm bringing this up because somebody might look at my keep and be like, well, I've got ground and I've got mounted, so why not? But for mine, I've intentionally structured it like this, and everything else in my keep, debuffs, refines, everything else is done to fit this structure.
Hmm.
So I like what you're saying, where you say people should be careful about if you're a carved trap, be careful about how you build ground into your trap.
Yes. Especially nowadays, because I mean, I've seen so many just cav solos and even ground solos, and typically if you're a trap, you're not going to compete against these ground march sizes these days, and
Mhm.
that ground's just not going to benefit you, But I mean, in your case, I like that build. I do. That's an interesting build, and I think that's got some potential there, Eka. You're onto something, buddy.
Yeah, it's not the typical carve structure, and I've had this for a while. It works, quite well for me, but it does have its downsides. It's not all roses and sunshine over here. Okay. uh, yeah. So we've talked about the troop part. What will you say about like refines? Okay, so somebody that is building, that has their trap, and is like, like 200-300 million, and they're trying to, build it out so that it's more effective now. What do you think they should do with their refines?
I still think to this day they should be flat mounted refines across the board, dragon
Okay.
and wall.
There's a lot of stuff that's going on. I think there was a point in time where bigger keeps were saying that it's better to transition from flats to percentage for their keeps now. But these keeps, they're really big keeps, and I
Yes.
kind of see you kind of see situation where people are saying I want to build out, and they kind of feel like they've outgrown the flat refines. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's important to understand, why do we use a flat refines, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the reason why we use a flat refines nowadays, or even just back then and now, is because you can't debuff the flat refines, and
Mm-hmm.
they're going to be effective, up into your mid layers.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is, flat refines will still take effect up to T8s, T9s, and slightly T10s, not so
Mm-hmm.
much. But those are still stats or buffs, so to speak, that it's just at this moment in the game, you cannot debuff those stats. So that's
Mm-hmm.
why they're so effective. And with what they've added to the game recently, with I know the most one of the most recent wall generals, he offered some flats as far as like buffs
Mm-hmm.
go. Um, your specialties offer a couple of flats in here, so I mean
Mm-hmm.
that benefits the trap keeps as well. And I know there's a few other places where you guys can gain flat stats, so to speak. And
Okay, I
that's
think
what makes it
yeah,
important.
yeah, okay. All right, that's fine. So you think we should still maintain flats for the refines? I agree with that. If you're still a trap, I think it's still much more beneficial for you to have flat refines than percentages. Although, whatever buffs you can get, that helps. And there are other places, like you said, the battle tested specialty is there. I think there's some civ cards and other things. So getting those flat buffs wherever you can, I think is very helpful.
Hmm.
What about the dragon? You still keep it flat on the dragon?
100%. I think it's crucial, very crucial to keep your flat refines on your dragon.
Okay, yeah, and I like what you've done here. You've gone with the HP. Okay,
Hmm.
I obviously people can refine whatever they want on the dragons, but even for me, I found that HP refines on the wall dragon specifically are probably the best way to go.
I agree. They refine typically higher, which is nice.
All right, so that's good. So, keep it flat on the dragon, preferably, HP, things like that. Okay. Now, we've talked about the wall general, we've talked about the dragon, but what about buffs in general? So
Ooh.
somebody that had a calf trap,
Mhm.
what kind of buffs should they be prioritizing? Like, like from their research and from those kind of things like that.
Speaking as a trap, I think there's a few things that come to mind for me. And the first thing automatically for me is going to be reinforcement capacity. I know that's not a buff, but I
Hmm.
think it's very crucial to be a T1
Okay.
trap, especially the more reinforcements you have or you can get in certain situations is beneficial. And as far as the buffs go, I think I'd like to oh man, I love traps. You're gonna get me going. So
Go on, man. Go on.
like when it comes to like quote unquote buffs, when you say buffs, I think of percents. And thinking of percents,
Hmm.
I'm thinking of military academy, I'm thinking the normal academy. So looking
Yeah.
at that, I think prioritizing how you're going to spend your tax scrolls, how you're going to spend your runestone, your stones for research, then also your gold is going to be all right. Where can I get buffs? Well, if people didn't know, inside of research, and I know you have to level up to it, but there are flat refines that you guys can get. And I don't want to scroll through and find them,
Hmm.
but there are some flat buffs you guys can get inside of the newer academy sections. And outside of that, it's like, all right, I got my flat buffs. Okay, what can I focus next? Those are all done. Well, I would go with ranged, and that's just my opinion.
Okay.
I would prioritize ranged because range is so universal, and they play such a big role in the battle mechanics that I think those are very important. Then ground, then mounted, then siege. So I think you should prioritize range, ground, mounted, then siege.
That's actually very interesting that you say that because, somebody that is a calf trap might think that they should prioritize mounted.
They may think that, but there's a lot of situations, where there, and this is just from my experience that I've dealt with in my era of playing, you know, you're gonna see a lot of traps get hit with mounted solos and even mounted rallies. So I think it's
Hmm.
very important to still prioritize those archer buffs, along with the mounted debuffs and the archer debuffs. Those are going to be your two weaknesses right there. Unless
Hmm.
you're facing like a new K50 with those incredible march sizes, just sending ground solos at
Then
what,
you
like
run.
three build
Then you
power.
then, yeah, then you just turn tail and run, man.
Yeah, yeah. Don't, yeah. Just go, and don't look
Yeah.
back.
Okay, okay. So you're saying range should be the primary buff that people are focusing on when they're getting their buffs from their other places. Okay, so after range, then you say ground.
Yes, I think ground is very
Okay.
important. Um, with that being said, I honestly I would say it's kind of like a 50-50, right? Focus range,
Hmm.
focus ground. I think they kind of go hand in hand because
Hmm.
it depends on the player who's attacking you. Their mounted might be higher or their range might be higher. Um,
Hmm.
so focusing ground is going to be beneficial because you're going to counter those range solos and those range rallies and all. And the same goes with the mounted. I think those are the two things you need to be very wary of as a trap nowadays are the calves and the ranged.
Okay. Okay, I guess that makes sense, but you probably won't. I mean, traps that are properly built will probably not be taking a lot of ground solos, would they?
Typically, no. And I think that's situational as well. Because if you're getting ground soloed, I think there's only two reasons why you're getting ground soloed. And reason number one is it's a unexperienced player thinking that they're going to clear you with ground because their ground is typically a little bit stronger march size wise compared to their other marches. Um,
Hmm.
and reason number two is if you're getting ground soloed, it's going to be by somebody that has spent a lot of money for these extreme ground buffs and extreme ground march sizes, K47, I mean, yeah, K47s to 50s. And at
Hmm.
that point, like you said about a minute ago, tuck tail and run.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, so we have focusing on range, focus on ground, then you say focus on mounted, then finally siege for the buffs that you get outside your city. Okay, that's fine.
Yes.
Now, what about the debuffs?
Ooh, this is a good one. This is
Yeah.
a good
What
one.
about you?
So yeah, it now this is just my opinion, and some people
Mhm,
may disagree, but I still think that you should prioritize range debuffs,
mhm,
and then also mounted debuffs because siege debuffs I think will be you'll gain siege debuffs through tech and then also miscellaneous subsidy general stats. And the same goes for the ranged. Typically if you get a subsidy general that debuffs mounted, he has range ground attached to it. Um,
mhm,
but I think it's now this also depends on your coin in level 2, but it's much easier to debuff ground, as far as
mhm,
like the Andrew Jacksons go and your Catherine 2s go. Um, and I think those are just more universal and they're more cost effective to focus and
mhm.
very important to focus, as far as easier subgenerals to get. So I mean, if I had to pick, I'd say focus your mounted debuff. I'm sorry, focus your range debuffs and then your mounted debuffs in that order.
Okay. Range debuffs, mounted debuffs. All right, that's fine. Okay, so we've talked about the generals, but then what about the gear?
Now this is where it can get tricky. So I would like to kind of look at it as more of a low spender, as
Mhm,
far as trying to get the gear, right? So I think
mhm,
it's very crucial to run complete sets for your
mhm,
subgenerals. So that way you are getting the debuff across the board of the 20% on the enemy troop attack. Now I know
mhm,
this may vary depending on what people have available to them, but this is a goal I think everyone should have. Um,
mhm,
so I think, it's crucial to focus on the range troop debuffs, as far as HP goes, as far as attack goes. Now, mine are a little bit different. I am focusing a little bit more towards the range and the mounted compared to anything
mhm.
else. Um, but if you're looking at the debuff gear, I would say prioritize. Ooh, sorry about that.
No worries.
I would say prioritize ranged first, the HP and the attack. You're not going
Mhm,
to find too much ranged troop defense debuffs out there, but you can debuff the HP, which is important, and the attack as well. And then I would say after that, I would focus on the mounted troop attack as much as you possibly can too.
mm. Okay, that's interesting because I see I see what you have there. I've obviously for my keep, I agree with what you say. Get the generals, as much as you can. If you can see, I have, some Andrew Jacksons in here and some other stuff. So I have quite a bit of focus on range debuff.
Mm.
The gear choice itself, I think, went with like a slightly different approach. Like obviously I have these ones in here, but like the helmet, for example. Okay, I have this helmet which is focused a lot on ground defense and ground HP. Okay,
Hmm.
but I saw yours, and no pun intended, of course. I saw yours, and you had, um, the one with the mounted debuff, and I
Hmm.
thought that was interesting.
So, for me, in my situation on this keep, I have that primarily because, so if I get attacked, it's generally going to be, a big siege, and then maybe about for my competitive level, like four to five archers, and
Mhm,
I'm content with taking that. And I don't think I need to debuff too much more past that, past where I'm at
mhm,
right now, because I don't think my troops will survive, those extra 6 or 7 archer rallies. So then
mhm,
after my wall's dead, I would like to try and debuff a little bit to the mounted that's going to be coming next. So I did
mhm.
pick up some mounted debuffs along the way.
Yeah, okay. I've got your screen up again. Let me see the helmet real quick because I want to see. Okay, so with this one, with the Apollo, that's about 59% that you're getting for the mounted attack. Okay,
Yep.
all right. I'm just mentally doing, the calculation and the trade-off between the mounted and the ground debuffs, if you have them, if you're having them there. But Yeah, like I think for what you're saying, if as a trap, if mounted is going to be a thing, then this might be something for people to consider.
So, would you mind if I showed you something real quick? And you're
Yeah,
more than
go on.
welcome to cut this out later on.
No,
So,
go on, go on. Mhm.
so I ran into a situation recently this past SVS, and I think it's important to kind of realize, what we're facing these days, right? And what I mean by the mounted solos is I met this gentleman over here during SVS, and what
Mhm,
he ended up doing with my keep currently, because I am so lower mounted heavy,
mhm,
he only sent mounted at me all weekend. That's all he would
mhm,
do. And as you can see, he's a pretty large keep. He's sending about 11. He's working towards about 12 mil March size.
mhm,
Um, and he's buffing around 7,200 for his mounted.
mhm,
And if taking a look at what he's doing here, is he was very heavy.
mhm,
He has about 10,000 layers, and he sent full T16s.
mhm,
And what he was trying to do there is, I'll go through the report as fast as I can. Um, where a lot of my upper tier troops were not affected with this march really. So in
mhm,
return, with what he was doing there is he was aiming towards my lower tier troops.
mhm,
My T4s, my T5s, my T3s. If you look at the
mhm,
T4s, they started getting a lot more wounded here. My T3s as well started to get a lot more wounded here, along with my T2s.
mhm,
And then he also dipped into the T1s. So it was this is what I mean by, it's still very important to focus on the mounted debuffs nowadays, because I think a lot of players are switching to running those higher cav marches against trap keeps, where it's specifically focusing more towards the lower layers, and they
mhm,
they still have those big layers in between with those big buffs that can kill your layers alongside of their higher tier troops hitting your lower tier wall.
mhm.
So that's why I've kind of focused on. I made a little bit of a focus towards a mount.
Okay. If do you mind if can I see your mounted debuff?
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. This is this
Um,
is this is cool.
it's nothing to
This is
shake a
cool.
stick at, but it's still I have to focus as much as I can, because you'd be surprised the amount of solo mounted that come after me still, even at my
No,
size.
no, that's very it's very instructive. It's puts some stuff into perspective because I'm looking at this and I'm thinking my mounted attack debuff is not up to 2000 yet.
Mm.
So maybe that's something that, an area that I should also work on. My range, I think, is okay. My ground is okay as well, but my mounted, I would like to improve a bit more.
Yeah, I'm not saying, focus, like, okay, I'm gonna go switch everything over to mounted debuffs now. I don't think that's something that someone should do. Um,
Hmm.
but I still think they should consider, at least, am I ready to start focusing some mounted debuffs now and throwing that into the mix? Can I sacrifice some of those ground debuffs or the siege debuffs or the range debuffs? Can I sacrifice some of those? Um, because the marches have changed over the years, and the composition of how troops attack with these larger troops now, the distances and everything like that, it makes a
Hmm.
big difference now, and it's very crucial to take that all into account and focus kind of where you're weakest at. And for me, it was mounted. That's why I'm doing this. And
Okay.
a lot of players recognize that not everyone focuses those mounted debuffs like they used to.
Mhm. Okay. That's good. Very, very enlightening. And I think that, you know, that little bit will be, quite helpful for some players that are trying to build out and, get their stuff to be effective. Because, looking at this is a good report, man. I mean, forget anything. This is good.
Yeah, and
Um,
the one previous to that too was also another mounted that he
mhm,
sent, just different layers,
mhm,
and you can't shake a stick at mounted anymore. There's too many
mhm.
buffs out there, and the march sizes for mounted are just too effective nowadays to ignore.
Yeah. we've gone through the kind of stuff that people should pay attention to. Now, let me ask you, the money question. If you were going to build a trap keep right now, blank slate, okay, fresh from scratch, what would you do? How would you build it out?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because I am doing
Mhm.
that in a sense, right? So from a blank
Okay.
slate, though, okay, tomorrow morning I wake up and I'm saying, all right, Akka, I'm going on a mission. Give me one
Mhm.
year to build this account. And
Okay.
what I would do, oh man, I don't know if we have time for this answer, but I'm gonna try and shorten it as best I can for you here, buddy.
Okay.
So I would focus first and foremost. I would say, all right, I need to get to K30. I need to start some good tech upgrades.
Okay.
Mainly just for the
K35. Okay.
yep. I want to try and get those T14s like as fast as I can before SVS, right? Um,
Okay.
and then I'm gonna be in that tavern. I'm gonna be getting as much range debuff as I possibly can early on. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna focus on range debuffs, and I'm gonna be building as much T1 and T2 cav as possible with very minimal layers.
Okay.
So, I would prioritize my resources to probably get into about early on, between 3 and 500 mil T1s, about 100 to
Okay.
200 mil T2s, and I would kind of stop there for a little while. But then I'd
Mm-hmm.
probably aim for around maybe 500 to a million layers up until about T10s, and then I would dust it out a little bit from there.
Okay.
And I would head towards K40 next. That'd be the goal. And once I achieve K40, it's like, all right, we need to make a push. And that push would be, I'd be like, all right, I'm going on the grind. I'm going to be getting my 1 to 2 bill T1s, 500 to 1 bill T2s, and then maybe
Mm-hmm.
250 to 500 mil T3s for calves.
Mm-hmm.
And I would still at that point still be focusing on my range debuffs at that point. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe have your layers, your ground layers, 2 million. Your archer layers, I think, should still maintain 1 or 2 million for the moment. And then your siege maybe at 500,000 to maybe a million at that point. And then I would kind of sit there for a bit, make sure my sub generals were good. I'm debuffing my archers. I'm slowly debuffing the mounted. Um, and once I was comfortable with those reports, I would start building my T12 archers and down, to
Okay.
as much as you want, in my opinion, as much as you want.
Any siege? Just minimal?
I would still say minimal, as long as
Okay.
you're not a rally, just have enough in there so that way they fight, that way they're involved in battle for the layers, but nothing more than
Mm-hmm.
that.
Okay. All right. That's cool. That's cool. We talked about, you talked about, hitting the tavern and getting the debuffs. What about your wall general? What will you do for that? Who would you go with?
So that is a great question. That is a phenomenal question. And I don't have the perfect answer for that because I can't make my mind up on that. Um, but what I would suggest at this point is, I wouldn't go with the, uh, Queen Bee or Queen Boudica, I guess some people would call her. I wouldn't go
Okay.
with her. What I would focus at this point is having one debuff general as the assistant, and then a
Mm-hmm.
tavern general or a range general that you can get easy copies of and to ascend them because having the T12 archers and down, I think it's to buff those T12s and T11s with as much percentages as you can to kind of counter attack the incoming mounted that you're seeing nowadays, right? So I would focus. I would definitely focus ranged for a main general that you can ascend, and then I would slap on a ranged debuff slash mounted debuff sub general as the assistant.
Oh, yes, that's actually a very interesting take. So you wouldn't go for, like, let's say Dewey, for example.
I would not. Nope, I don't think he's going
Okay.
to offer trap keeps the necessary buffs that you're going to need. I think you can gain a lot more from debuffs than also archer buffs.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting. That's interesting. All right. So if you do that, then how about the transition? Because, like early on, okay, that you could start with that, but would you keep that?
So that's a fair question. So when you say transition, do you mean transition into like a rally keep where you're in the hive joining rallies, or just a larger scale trap?
Let's say that, okay, if we want to look at it at a bit larger scale, okay, you've done the initial bits, you've done the K35, you've unlocked your T14, you've built like your 1 billion T1 cav, you've built some T2 cav, you've built out the other layers and things like that, you've built out the range that you wanted to do. So beyond that point, or let's say up to that point, the combination that you're talking about with a range general and a debuff general, yeah, I think that's viable, that would work. But then beyond that point, do you still keep it? And if you keep it, up until which point?
So, okay. I That's a good question, and I haven't been able to experience that yet. But looking at what I have as far as a game plan goes in that type of build is I would still maintain those generals, because even as you grow past that K35 point, your tech's going to increase, which means your range buffs are going to increase. Your debuffs will also increase. They kind of coincide with each other, right?
Yeah.
So I think unless you're making a transition to being a rally joining keep, I think it's going to be crucial to focus the troops that you have in your keep that are doing work for you, which is going to be your range troops, right? And that's not to take away from the ground troops, but it all depends on your build. If you're heavier on the ground, maybe eventually kind of slightly switch to someone like Dewey or something a little bit different. But for a general trap keep, I would focus on staying with either 2 debuff generals or 1 range attack general, and then also 1 debuff general. And I would
Okay.
stay with that build until I was like, all right, I want to start joining rallies. Then once you start building those upper tier troops, you really need to adjust your wall at that point.
Okay. All right. All right. That makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. Now, sorry, man. I need to put you on the spot for this a little bit. Okay. So,
Uh-oh.
yeah, don't worry. It's cool. It's cool. So, give me examples of the kind of generals that you would consider for this.
Well,
Okay.
I'm
I
I'm
mean,
still flipping
yeah,
a coin on that.
because I want, that's why I said, sorry, I don't want to putting you on the spot for a bit, but let's actually talk now concrete. What kind, like which general would you pick for this?
So, my go-to right now on the trap that I'm building is James Cook, because he's
Okay.
focusing range troop attack by 50%, and he's increasing range troop and siege machines defense and HP by 40%. And now I know that might be deceiving because it says siege machine there, but I'm really looking at that number of 40% and 50% for my range troops.
Okay.
Now that he might not be viable for all players, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, you may have to go a different route. And I'm not sure what general you need to go with that yet, because I haven't explored too much, but I
Mm-hmm.
know there are some generals in the tavern that you can kind of look at. And oh man, okay, maybe a little bit in the spot. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
prepared for this, but we're gonna take a look.
No, I'm sorry, man. Sorry to put you, because I know that this is something that a lot of people are gonna ask, because if they're like, okay, if we're gonna use like a range general, somebody we can get from the tavern, then who do we use? Like you told, I don't know if he's tavern, but the when you said that, the first general that came to my mind was Louis the Ninth.
Louis the Ninth, yes.
Yeah, he's in Europe.
Oops, sorry about that. He's in Europe.
Yeah,
Okay, so we're looking for
that's
the
him right there.
ninth, Louis the Ninth.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
So, I mean, as far as like a tavern general, um,
I
oh,
don't
he's
think
not
I don't
available.
think he's in the tavern, but
Yep,
he's in the what do you call it? The Ascension, Trial of Knights. I
Trial of
believe
Knights.
yeah. I don't know if he's still in there. Maybe they took him out, but I know he was there for a long time.
So, I don't have a good answer at the moment for who would be a good
Okay.
tavern general for that. Only because my heart is so set on James Cook at the moment.
Yeah.
But I mean, quickly looking, you have Edward the Black Prince, who is leading the army. So for
Mhm.
lower coiners or free to play players, it's gonna slightly help you only because he's gonna increase your range troop attack by 25%, and he reduces
Mhm.
the enemy mounted troop attack by 15%. When the general's leading
Mhm.
the army. So I mean, that's a solution for somebody that doesn't have, the ability to kind of coin for the glory skull, the general
Yeah.
tokens, you know.
Okay.
So
All
there
right.
are
Okay.
other avenues.
There are possibilities. All right. Let me ask you something. What about Zachary Taylor?
Zachary Taylor, me and Zachary Taylor, we have a history, me and
Mm-hmm.
Zachary, and I don't know if I have him on this account or not. I think I might not. I don't think I have him. Um,
Yeah.
but I believe, without looking at his stats, isn't he somewhere around like 40 or 50% range troop attack, somewhere
Yeah,
around
for the
there?
main skill. Yeah, something like that.
So
We can we
as
can let-
long,
we can let's pull him up in the tavern.
okay, all right, let's do
Yeah.
that real quick. Oops.
So America defense. No, it'd be for defense.
So he'd be subordinate
Defense.
city, defense.
Defense. Yes. There he
Zachary
is.
Taylor. All right.
Yeah.
So increases in city range troops attack by 50% when the general is the main city defense general. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's very beneficial
Mm-hmm.
because 50%, I mean, that's a good base number, right? That's a
Yeah.
good base number. The only thing that would deceive me right away is that I see ground.
Mm-hmm.
I see ground over here. I see ground down here. But on the contrary, you're going to be in city of range troop defense 30%. I think that's huge because
Mm-hmm.
that means your range is going to survive a little bit longer. Your mounted troop is going to be 20%. Not a huge deal. It will affect
Mm-hmm.
your lower tiers, but very, very slightly.
Mm-hmm.
So nothing to really shake a stick at. Um, Range troop HP 30%. I think that's huge. And city ground troop and mounted troop defense. Now I know it sounds negative when I say ground troop buffs. It might sound negative. I think it is beneficial, especially if you're focusing on those like T8, T9, T10 ground for your layers. I think that's beneficial to have him running with them. But as far as speaking as range goes, into your range troop attack, another 20%, defense and HP 30%. This last skill right here, I think, is very crucial, very very crucial because you're nailing all of the range stats across the board.
Yeah.
On top of the 50%.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Oh,
So all right, that's cool. So we're talking of and we're looking at it of Zachary Taylor as the general for a calf trap, right?
yes.
Okay. All right. That's cool. Now, for the sub general that you would use, who do you fancy?
So this is a great question because I mean it all depends on your coining level, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
but the first thought is going to be in Andrew Jackson. Reduces enemy range troops attack by 20%, and it also debuffs mounted troops HP by 20% on top of what he's
Okay.
offering for every single ascension. But the hidden gem here, I think, is going to be in Russia,
Mm-hmm.
which is going to be Catherine II. And people
Mm-hmm.
are going to look at it and go, oh, it increases troop training speed. I don't want that. Well, you might change your mind if you actually take a look at what she's debuffing.
Mm-hmm.
Because she's going to offer ranged on the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth
Mm-hmm.
ascension skills. And I think this is very important because reducing enemy range troops, defense and HP 10%, defense and HP 10%, attack 10%. And again, defense and HP 20%, and then attack by another 25%. So overall, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but as a lower coiner or free to play, I think she's very crucial to have. Her, and then also Andrew Jackson, I think are extremely
Okay.
important for these builds.
All right. It's interesting that you mentioned Catherine because when people mention Catherine, they usually mention her for the siege debuff, but
Mm-hmm.
you're actually mentioning her for the range debuff.
Yes.
Okay, that's nice. That's interesting.
It's the subtle details that some people miss where you can, I mean, it depends on your coining level, right? And some people unfortunately or fortunately cannot coin as heavy as other
Mhm.
players. So you got to look at all avenues, and this is something I think is kind of overlooked in
Mhm.
today's day and age.
Okay, all right, that's good. And to be fair, even the training speed itself is not entirely useless. So okay, all right, fair
Well, I
enough.
mean, s-
Yeah.
so quick little side note, right? Increases troop training speed in the subordinate city when the general is a mayor. So say you take this 35% and then you also include your civ treasure, um, subordinate city training speed. It depends on what level you're at, but 21%. So like I'm just call that 50%. So if I'm a smaller trap keep where I'm getting smacked like crazy and they're killing all my sub troops, it's not good when my sub troops die because you need them for those debuffs and everything, right? So the faster you kind of build them up, the better debuffs you're gonna maintain at a longer period of time.
All right, that's cool. That's cool. And while we're looking at Catherine, I noticed something in her stats, and it's for the main skill. Yes, okay. It says when she's the mayor. So
Mhm.
I think if we're using her in the sub, I think that's perfectly fine. But I don't think we can we use her as the assistant on the wall?
I wouldn't recommend it. Um,
Okay.
I think you can get better. You can focus more debuffs with, someone like Andrew Jackson on the wall
Okay. Okay.
compared to Catherine.
All right. All right. That's fine. That's fine. Okay, so we've gone through everything that you would do, with the build and things like that for the initial setup. Now, kind of going back to one of the questions that we talked about earlier, how would you play this new trap? Is it
Oh,
just, drop bubble and anybody who wants some can get some kind of thing?
well, and I might sound like a broken record here, buddy, but I truly think it depends on your surroundings and your situation, right? Like what type
Okay.
of SVSs are you facing? What type of battlefields are you facing?
Mhm.
If you're more of an independent player where you don't have many strong teammates to reinforce you, I think that's kind of more of a take one hit and run type keep, right? Whether it's
All right.
SVS or
All right.
Battlefield.
Okay.
Um, when it comes to being part of a more competitive alliance, I think it's very important to focus on your strengths as an alliance with you being a trap keep. And what I mean by that is, when you're getting focused by an enemy team in SVS or Battlefield, it's important to play strategic and say, okay, how can I trick the enemy to solo me while having reinforcements?
Hmm.
And with that being said, I think that will it depends on how you want to play. So you got to put yourself in the shoes of being more competitive or less competitive with your teammates. For me, in my shoes, building my current trap keep that I'm working on, I would rely on being more competitive. So I would say I would like to be more on a building control situation, or like maybe even just a trap keep in SVS where I can hide, get reinforcements, and get hit a couple of times, and then I would run for the hills. Same
Hmm.
thing with kind of Battlefield too. Um, I want to survive those solo attacks while taking buildings, but if I get stuck in a situation where I can't port, I would also like to have as many reinforcements as possible to help with those consistent solo attacks, or even a rally.
Mm.
So I'd be a jumper. I'd like to jump around for me.
All right. That's good. That's good. And it also goes back to the point where you said earlier about focusing on like your reinforcement capacity.
Yeah, I think that is going to be crucial. Because so just say I don't know the size of reinforcements for a K35 at the moment. My current trap is K39, and I think I'm maxing out somewhere around about 24 million.
Hmm.
And that's with I believe my embassy is either 38. I believe it's 38, maybe 39 right now. And you know I have some strong teammates where they're sending 13 million troops or 10 million troops with a march. So I'm only getting two reinforcements, but depending on
Yeah.
the team that you're on, you could get up to, four or five people in there, and that's
Hmm.
going to help you survive a lot of attacks.
Okay. All right. That's good. That's good. That's good. Great stuff. So I think we've pretty much covered all the important topics and aspects that we need to. If we missed anything out, I'm sure some people will leave comments for us, and we'll get back to that maybe later. Who knows? Maybe even a second video. We'll see.
Ooh,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
like
man.
that. Because I could
Okay.
keep going, Aka. I could keep going,
I know
man.
you can. I know you can.
We still got the
All right.
pasture to cover, your Senate. We got all kinds of spots we can talk about.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So, guys, if you're watching this and you want a part two, just drop it in the comments. Say we need that part two. Okay, Mr.
I
Yours.
agree. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, yes.
Thank you very much for making yourself available. I really appreciate the fact that you took the time out and helped us go through this topic, which is actually a very serious and maybe even troubling topic for some people in the game right now. So thank you for coming in, helping put some positivity, some insightfulness, and some learning on people. Okay, thank you very much for that, man.
Of course, man. It's an absolute pleasure, and I'm honored to be on it with you, buddy. I am, Aka. I love you, bro. I do.
I love you, man. Thank you very much, man. So, guys, I'll have the link to Mr. Yoris's channel down in the description of this video. If you haven't checked him out, he streams. Okay, it's nice. It's good fun. Hop in there, tell him hi. He would love you for that. Okay, jump in, watch some Evony. Learn some stuff, have fun.
Take care, Aka. Be good, my man.
All right. Thank you. So that's it for us. Aka, Mr. Yours, signing out.